Hello and welcome to Transition Planning. My name is Terry Blavelt. I'm going to help you navigate through some of the basics on transition planning, why it's so important, and why we need to make sure that we are working diligently to make outcomes better for students as they go through transition planning. Okay, so to start off, we're going to look at what is transition planning, and it is set down by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. 2004 was when it was last reauthorized. And it states that it is a process of improving the functional and academic achievements of students with disabilities as they move toward from school to post-school outcomes, okay? So they look at post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, continuing adult services, adult education, independent living, community participation. So all of those pieces fit into aspects of transition services. So by the time they graduate from high school, we would have had to look through all these pieces and see what their needs are, what goals we need to put in place for them, and work through those to make sure that they have what they need when they no longer with us in a school setting. So that is, as a school is concerned, the main purpose of transition is through the IDEA to assist kids, making sure that they have the best possible outcomes going forward after graduation from school. So what we need to know first is who qualifies for transition service. Well, if you have an IEP, you have transition services. But on top of that, the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973 states that there are 4 requirements for eligibility as far as vocational rehabilitation goes. So you might have transition services, but you may not exactly qualify for vocational rehabilitation with your transition services. So you have to meet all 4 of these requirements in order to qualify for vocational rehabilitation. You have to have a physical or mental impairment, so an IEP qualifies you that way. You should have the impairment must result in a substantial impediment to employment, so a way that makes them ineligible to be employed independently. An individual must be able to benefit from vocational rehabilitation services in terms of employment outcomes. Easy to qualify for that, and an individual must be required vocational rehabilitation services in order to obtain or maintain appropriate employment. So we're looking at people that would be maybe have a more mild or moderate severe disability, those with autism, maybe those with emotional disabilities, anybody that would struggle being able to maintain employment by themselves without having somebody maybe there to make connections with, get them started in the job, or help them with maintaining or keeping a job, okay? So transition services are part of the IEP. You will have goals related to areas of transition, but vocational rehabilitation is one part of that, and there are these 4 things that you have to be able to qualify for to get that additional services where they come in and actually help you with job placement and job skills. So what's the difference between Special Education Services and Americans with Disabilities Act, so ADA? Special education falls under the IDEA purview, and Americans with Disabilities Act is really for the rights and protection of all adults with disabilities. So students may need the services through the ADA after they graduate, and they do have transition plans and community services and that sort of thing available to people in need of further services. Because once you hit the age of 23, your IEP is no longer, you can be in school with an IEP through the age of 23, and after that, then you no longer qualify under the IDEA 2004 provisions, so that time the ADA can take over. But again, like I mentioned before, vocational rehab is listed as a service, and that goes along with it. Okay, so independent living skills is one of the major 3 areas that they look at for your IEP, okay? So when we're doing transition, your transition can be in education, it can be in employment, and it can be in independent living. So independent living skills are just the one area that might be let go that you don't need, okay? So they would depend on the severity of your disability, and at an IEP meeting, we'll all sit down and say, hey, this is the surveys we took, this is the information we gathered, and we feel that the student does not need additional services for independent living. If you feel they do need services for independently, usually those fall into like being help with leisure activities or recreational help, home maintenance help, personal care, or community participation. So you're looking more at those severe disability areas that tend to need that living with help versus like your SLD kid, who most likely would be able to go to college, live on their own, be able to pay bills, drive a car, that sort of thing. They wouldn't need help making connections in their community. Next, let's talk about self-determination and self-advocacy. Students need to understand, in order to self-advocate for themselves, they need to know what their strengths are, what they know their challenges to be, if they have any specific needs and preferences for job-related skills. And they have to have, this is the hardest one, the ability to act on their own behalf. Students oftentimes know what they need, but they can't communicate that. I've also known in the past a lot of kids that don't even realize they have an IEP, and it kind of makes me sad that they get to a certain age and they have no idea what kind of services they have or what kind of helps they get. I think teachers have stay away from that because they don't want to have that stigma with the student of an IEP, but I think it's important that we relay that information in a meaningful way for students so that they can begin to self-advocate for themselves, so they know that they get extra help, they get these services, and not to be ashamed of it, but be excited that that helps them be able to bridge gaps and to meet curricular needs in a better way. So next is employment and work skills. So this is another area, independent living and employment and work skills is another area that you would be qualified for in transition planning. And so for employment outcomes to become successful, you need to collaborate with vocational rehab. Okay, so that's the first step, is invite vocational rehab together. Make sure that you meet those 4 criteria. You need to have good parent involvement, student involvement, and a collaboration between voc rehab and the school to make it successful. A lot of times there's a gap somewhere in there that we need to correct. We need to make sure that the parents understand what those services are and make sure that they're on board with making those services happen. Students need to put their all into it to make sure that they qualify correctly. If students aren't involved in the service, then a lot of times vocational rehabilitation fails because the student doesn't have the buy-in for it. So they're either canceling the service, not meeting, not sticking with it, that kind of thing. And so it's vital that that relationship takes off. In a recent survey, they surveyed 200 participating teachers, and they found that only 29% of 200 teachers followed through with communicating and inviting vocational rehab counselors to the IEP meetings. So that's a pretty sad number, and it needs to be improved. Post-secondary education. After graduation, students exit through their IEP. Additional supports are available. Again, we've mentioned ADA services. There are community services, university assistance at times for students that have learning disabilities that are going to be in the schools. Sadly, post-secondary outcomes for students with disabilities is very low. A recent survey said that only 46% of students with a learning disability can find and keep employment versus 81% of their non-disabled peers. So it's a big jump between the outcomes for those that do have a disability versus those that do not have a disability. If you have any questions about transition or want to know more about how to get involved and do better transitioning, feel free to contact me. Here's a list of the references for this PowerPoint. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.